We talk a lot about the physical side of pleasure, the right touch, the right rhythm, the right position, and all of that matters. But if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right and still not getting there, or watched a partner struggle to relax into pleasure even when nothing seems physically wrong, you already know the truth. The body doesn't work in isolation from the mind. Orgasm isn't just a mechanical event. It's a state of surrender, a moment where the nervous system has to fully let go of vigilance, self-monitoring, and control. And that's precisely why psychology plays such an outsized role. You can have perfect technique and still hit a wall because the wall isn't in the body, it's in the head. In this video, we're going beyond the physical guides you've probably already seen. We're going to unpack 5 specific mental blocks that quietly sabotage arousal and orgasm, often without the person even realizing it's happening. Understanding these isn't just useful for women navigating their own pleasure, it's essential for partners who want to actually help, rather than unintentionally make things worse by focusing only on physical technique. Let's get into it. Mental block has shown. Spectatoring, watching yourself instead of feeling. Sex therapists have a specific term for one of the most common blocks to orgasm: spectatoring. It describes the experience of mentally stepping outside your body during intimacy and watching yourself as if you were an outside observer, evaluating how you look, how you sound, whether you're taking too long, whether your partner is enjoying themselves. The problem is simple. Orgasm requires you to be in your body, tuned into sensation. Spectatoring pulls you out of your body and into your head. It's essentially impossible to fully feel pleasure and fully monitor yourself at the same time the two states are neurologically at odds. Arousal is a parasympathetic rest and digest process. Self-monitoring activates the sympathetic, vigilant part of the nervous system. You cannot floor the gas and the brake simultaneously. Where this comes from, spectatoring rarely comes out of nowhere. It's often the byproduct of media and cultural conditioning. Women are bombarded with images of what sex is supposed to look like: camera ready, performative, aesthetically perfect. It's easy to internalize the idea that sex is something to be watched rather than something to be felt. Early experiences of being evaluated, a critical comment from a past partner, a joke that landed wrong, or even offhand remarks from friends about bodies and sex can plant a seed that grows into chronic self-surveillance. Perfectionism carried over from other areas of life. People who are high achievers or who tend to self-monitor in their careers or social lives often unconsciously bring that same evaluative lens into the bedroom. How it shows up feeling checked out during sex, like you're narrating the experience rather than living it. Becoming distracted by thoughts like, do I look okay right now? Or is this taking too long? Losing arousal the moment attention shifts from sensation to self-assessment. Feeling more relaxed and present in the dark or with eyes closed, because it removes the visual feedback loop. What helps? The antidote to spectatoring isn't trying harder to stop thinking. That usually backfires, because trying not to think about something keeps your attention locked onto it. Instead, the goal is to redirect attention towards sensation itself. Sensory anchoring, deliberately shifting focus to specific physical sensations, the feeling of skin, breath, warmth, pressure, gives the mind something concrete and pleasurable to attach to rather than an abstract evaluation. Mindfulness-based approaches. Practices that build the general skill of noticing sensation without judgment, even outside the bedroom, like mindful eating or walking, train the same mental muscle needed to stay present during sex, reducing visual self-monitoring. For some people, dimming lights or closing eyes during certain moments removes one layer of self-observation and makes it easier to drop into feeling rather than watching. Naming it in the moment. Simply recognizing I've stepped into spectator mode without shame can be enough to gently pull attention back into the body. Awareness itself starts to loosen the grip. Mental block #2, body image and the fear of being seen. It's hard to overstate how much body image shapes sexual experience. If a significant part of someone's mental bandwidth during intimacy is spent worrying about how their stomach looks from that angle, whether a partner notices cellulite or how they sound while breathing heavily, there's very little bandwidth left for pleasure. This isn't vanity, it's a survival-oriented distraction. The brain treats perceived social threat, being judged, being found unattractive, being rejected, as urgent and prioritizes it over everything else, including pleasure signals. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. The brain assumes that avoiding social rejection is more important in the moment than experiencing enjoyment. Unfortunately, That wiring doesn't distinguish between real danger and self-critical thought spirals. Why this block runs deep sex is uniquely exposing. Physically and emotionally, there's often nowhere to hide, literally and figuratively, which intensifies whatever insecurities already exist. Cultural beauty standards are relentless. Curated, filtered images create a baseline of comparison that almost no one's real, moving, breathing body can match. Body image issues often predate the relationship entirely. They can be rooted in adolescence, family dynamics, or years of internalized messaging long before a current partner ever entered the picture. This means a partner reassuring you're beautiful once or twice usually isn't enough to undo it. It's a deeper pattern that needs ongoing, patient care. How it shows up preferring certain positions, specifically because they hide certain body parts, rather than because they feel best. Avoiding intimacy during times of perceived body change, bloating, weight fluctuation, etc. Being unable to relax during oral sex or any position involving direct visual focus on the body, mentally leaving during moments of vulnerability, like eye contact or noise making, what helps? Reframing the goal of body image work. The target usually isn't to suddenly love every part of the body unconditionally. That's an unrealistic bar. It's to reduce the mental volume of self-criticism enough that it stops hijacking attention during intimacy. Partner behavior matters enormously. Genuine, specific, non-generic affirmation rather than vague, you're so hot, and consistent, non-sexual physical affection can slowly rebuild a sense of safety in being seen. Separating arousal from appearance monitoring. Learning to associate touch with sensation rather than with how do I look receiving this touch is a skill that develops with intentional practice, often aided by exercises that emphasize feeling over appearance, like sensate focus, discussed more below. Addressing body image outside the bedroom too. Since this block is rarely sex-specific, general self-compassion practices and reducing exposure to comparison-heavy media, social media, especially, often produce real spillover benefits into intimacy. Mental block #3. Mental load and the inability to switch off arousal requires the brain to downshift out of task mode. But for many women especially, those juggling careers, household management, caregiving, or emotional labor for everyone around them, the brain rarely gets permission to fully switch off, even during sex. This is sometimes called the mental load problem, and it's one of the most under-discussed barriers to orgasm. It's not about desire or attraction, it's about bandwidth. A brain that's mid-scan for tomorrow's to-do list, unresolved conflicts, or looming responsibilities is a brain that's still partially in manager mode. And manager mode and pleasure mode don't coexist well. Why this block is so common? Unequal distribution of invisible labor. Even in relationships that are otherwise balanced, research on household and emotional labor consistently shows women often carry a disproportionate share of the mental tracking, remembering appointments, managing logistics, anticipating others' needs. That tracking doesn't pause just because sex has started. Difficulty transitioning states. Many women report needing significantly more time than their partners to mentally transition from daily life mode into intimacy mode. Rushed or spontaneous sex without that transition time can leave the mind still tethered to whatever it was doing 5 minutes earlier. Stress hormones directly interfere with arousal. Elevated cortisol suppresses the physiological arousal response, meaning chronic stress isn't just a mental distraction. It has a measurable dampening effect on the body's ability to respond. How it shows up: feeling physically present but mentally distracted by unrelated thoughts throughout the entire encounter, needing a much longer runway of foreplay or connection before the mind starts to quiet down. Losing arousal the moment an intrusive thought, email, a chore, a worry, pops up, feeling resentment or fatigue around initiating sex, specifically because it feels like one more thing to do. What helps building in a transition ritual? A buffer between day mode and intimacy mode, a shower, a few minutes of quiet, a walk, even just closing the laptop and sitting quietly for 10 minutes gives the brain time to downshift before intimacy begins. Addressing the mental load itself, not just the symptom. If someone is chronically overloaded, no amount of bedroom technique will fully fix it. Rebalancing responsibilities, or even briefly unloading the mental list onto paper before intimacy, can meaningfully clear headspace, extending foreplay and de-emphasizing a fixed endpoint. Removing the pressure of, we need to get to orgasm, and instead treating the whole experience as exploratory reduces the sense that this is one more task with a deadline. Partners checking in about timing, not just consent. Simply asking, is now a good time, or do you need a bit to unwind first, can prevent starting from a state the mind was never going to be able to relax from. Mental block #4, past experiences and the body's protective memory the nervous system remembers. Past negative sexual experiences ranging from a dismissive or careless partner to painful sex that was pushed through rather than addressed, to more serious experiences like sexual trauma, can leave behind protective patterns that persist long after the original event, even in a completely safe, loving relationship. This isn't a conscious choice. It's the nervous system doing exactly what it's designed to do. Flag anything that pattern matches to past threat and trigger a protective response, even when the current situation is objectively safe. This can look like the body tensing up, arousal shutting down mid-encounter, or a sudden emotional shift, sadness, panic, disconnection with no clear conscious trigger. Why this is often missed doesn't always look like trauma. Many people assume this block only applies to survivors of serious sexual assault. But smaller experiences, chronic pain during sex that was never addressed, a partner who was rough or dismissive, early sexual experiences shaped by shame or secrecy can create similar, if milder, protective patterns. It can be inconsistent. Someone might feel completely fine one time and suddenly blocked the next, which can be confusing and frustrating for both partners if they don't understand the underlying mechanism. Logic doesn't override it. Knowing intellectually I am safe right now doesn't necessarily override a nervous system response that's operating below the level of conscious thought. How it shows up: sudden loss of arousal or a feeling of shutting down with no obvious cause, difficulty with certain positions, types of touch, or phrases that unconsciously echo a past experience. A pattern of dissociating mentally, leaving or going numb during intimacy, feeling fine emotionally before and after sex, but disconnected or anxious during it. What helps working with a qualified therapist? Ideally, one specializing in sexual health or trauma. This is the single most effective path when past experience is a significant factor. This isn't a block that self-help alone typically resolves, especially if there's a trauma history involved. Building a felt sense of safety, not just a stated one. Safety in this context isn't just my partner would never hurt me as a belief. It's about the nervous system gradually relearning safety through consistent, predictable, respectful experiences over time, slowing down and creating an opt-out at any point culture. Knowing on a felt level that anything can stop at any moment without conflict or disappointment reduces the underlying vigilance that keeps the protective response active. Somatic approaches. Body-based practices like somatic therapy, gentle movement, or breath work can help process stored physical tension in ways that talk therapy alone sometimes doesn't fully reach. It's worth saying clearly, this block deserves patience, not a quick fix. Progress here is often nonlinear, and that's normal. Mental block, #5, communication gaps and the fear of being too much. The final block is one of the most fixable and yet one of the most common. Not communicating about what feels good, what doesn't, what's needed, or what's simply not working in the moment. Many women describe an internalized fear of being too much, too demanding, too particular, too slow to arouse, too vocal about needs, especially in a culture that has historically framed female pleasure as secondary or optional. This fear often leads to silence, performing enjoyment rather than communicating actual needs, or simply staying quiet and hoping a partner figures it out. The irony is that this silence usually produces the exact outcome it's trying to avoid. A partner who doesn't know what's working will keep doing what isn't, arousal will stay stuck, and disconnection, the very thing the silence was meant to prevent, deepens instead. Why this block persists. Social conditioning around female pleasure. Many women grow up with far less explicit education about their own arousal and orgasm than men receive about theirs, which can create genuine uncertainty about what to even communicate. Fear of hurting a partner's feelings. Redirecting or offering feedback mid-sex can feel, incorrectly, like criticism, leading many women to just wait it out instead. Faking as a learned habit. Once someone starts faking orgasm or enthusiasm, even with good intentions, not wanting to disappoint a partner, it becomes a self-reinforcing pattern that makes honest communication feel even harder to introduce later. How it shows up staying quiet during sex, even when something isn't working. hoping it resolves on its own, faking arousal or orgasm to end an encounter or avoid an awkward conversation, feeling frustrated or resentful after sex without ever having voiced what was needed, avoiding conversations about sex outside the bedroom altogether, making in-the-moment communication even less likely. What helps? Practicing communication outside the bedroom first. Conversations about preferences, boundaries, and feedback tend to go far better in a low-pressure setting over coffee on a walk than in the heat of the moment. Using guiding rather than critical language. Phrases like "a little slower feels amazing" redirect without framing anything as wrong, which lowers the emotional stakes of speaking up. Normalizing that feedback is a gift, not a rejection. Reframing communication as something that makes sex better for both people rather than a complaint helps dismantle the too much fear at its root. Sensate focus exercises. A well-established technique from sex therapy, sensate focus involves structured touch exercises with a specific goal of practicing communication about sensation without the pressure of performance or a required outcome like orgasm. It's often one of the most effective tools for both body image issues and communication gaps simultaneously. If there's one thread that runs through all 5 of these blocks, it's this. Orgasm is not purely a physical event that technique alone can unlock. It's the downstream result of a nervous system that feels safe enough, present enough, and unburdened enough to let go. That reframing matters because it shifts the conversation away from what's wrong with her body and toward what does her mind and nervous system need in order to feel safe enough to fully arrive. For a lot of women, addressing these mental blocks does more for their sex life than any physical technique guide ever could. To recap the 5 blocks: spectatoring, mentally watching and evaluating instead of feeling, body image self-criticism that hijacks attention away from pleasure, mental load, an overloaded mind that can't fully downshift into the present past experience protective nervous system, patterns from previous negative experiences, communication gaps, silence driven by fear of being too much. None of these are personal failings. They're patterns learned, often over years, often reinforced by culture, past relationships, or simply the demands of daily life. And like any pattern, they can shift with awareness, patience, and often the right support, whether that's a patient partner, a sex therapist, or simply permission to slow down and prioritize presence over performance. If this video resonated with you, that's exactly the point. These aren't rare or unusual experiences. They're incredibly common and yet rarely talked about with this level of honesty. If you want to go deeper on any one of these 5 blocks specifically, let me know in the comments which one hit closest to home. And it might just be the next video on this channel. A word for partners watching this. If you're watching this because you want to understand a partner's experience better, the most useful shift you can make isn't learning a new physical technique. It's changing what you're paying attention to. Instead of asking, "What am I doing wrong?" it can help to ask, "What does she need to feel safe enough to be fully present right now?" Those are very different questions and they lead to very different behavior. Practically, this might mean taking orgasm off the table as the goal for some encounters. So there's no invisible finish line creating pressure. Offering specific, genuine affirmation rather than generic compliments, especially around moments of visible self-consciousness. Checking in about pace, mental load, or stress before assuming something is physically wrong. Responding to any feedback, even mid-moment redirection, with warmth rather than defensiveness. So honesty starts to feel safe rather than risky. Being patient with inconsistency. Some days will be easier than others. And that's normal, not a sign of a deeper problem. None of this requires perfection. It requires attentiveness, patience, and a willingness to prioritize connection over a specific outcome. When self-help isn't enough, it's worth being honest that not every version of these blocks resolves through communication, mindfulness, or patience alone. If a block is tied to significant past trauma, chronic pain during sex, persistent anxiety or depression, or ongoing relationship conflict, professional support is often the more effective and sometimes necessary path forward. A licensed sex therapist or a therapist trained in trauma-informed care can offer structured tools that go well beyond what general advice can provide. Seeking that kind of support isn't a sign of failure. It's simply recognizing that some patterns have roots deep enough to need a trained guide. To recap the 5 blocks: spectatoring, mentally watching and evaluating, instead of feeling body image self-criticism that hijacks attention away from pleasure. Mental load, an overloaded mind that can't fully downshift into the present. Past experience, protective nervous system patterns from previous negative experiences. Communication gaps, silence, driven by fear of being too much. None of these are personal failings. They're patterns learned, often over years, often reinforced by culture, past relationships, or simply the demands of daily life. And like any pattern, they can shift with awareness, patience, and often the right support. Whether that's a patient partner, a sex therapist, or simply permission to slow down and prioritize presence over performance. Full, satisfying pleasure was never only a physical destination. It's also a psychological one, built on safety, presence, and permission to let go. Once that becomes the frame, the conversation stops being about fixing a body and starts being about understanding a mind. That shift alone tends to open more doors than any technique guide ever could. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.